Our next storyteller seeks to escape her fate and find her place in the world through drastic measures. Along the way, she discovers some bittersweet truths about herself and the nature of belonging. Please welcome Lindsey Sikes with her story, A Tale of Two Bodies.
Hi. Oh, you really can't see anyone. That's cool. So, to keep the theater theme going, once in 9th grade, while I was rehearsing for a school play, I was dragging a desk off stage, walking backwards, and because I wasn't looking where I was going, I tripped, and I fell backwards onto a glass table. Actually, I fell through the glass table. And it took me a moment to kind of realize what had happened. I was dizzy and confused, and then I saw the shards of glass and the blood sticking out of my hands. And the thing I remember most was being extremely embarrassed. Soon a bunch of students ran up to see what all the commotion was about, and the look on their faces wasn't one of concern. They were trying to hold back laughter. I mean, it was funny that I, the fat girl, was so fat that I had fallen through a glass table and broken it. I mean, that's comedy 101, right? Classic fat girl move, I thought to myself as I got up and brushed the glass off and walked alone to the nurse's office so that she could bandage my hand. Now, when I say I was the fat girl growing up, I realize that might mean different things to different people. So when I say I was the fat girl, what I mean is that I was always the biggest person in the room, no matter where I went. I constantly felt people's eyes linger on me, stares of disbelief as I maneuvered my big body around spaces that only normal-sized people were supposed to fit. But I got used to it. I was constantly in pain, not just because having that much weight on your frame is actually very stressful to the body, but because most chairs with arms are not made for people the size I was, and I would have marks and bruises on my body anytime I went somewhere where I couldn't fit in a chair. But I got used to that too. But the thing that I couldn't get used to was being terrified of going to spaces and not knowing whether or not I was going to do something like fall through a glass table. Up until that point in my life, theater had really been the only escape for me, the escape from my fat girl fate. And the reason it was is because I loved theater because I was able to do whatever I wanted so long as the director or the script told me I could do it. No one could make fun of me for looking like a fool tripping and falling through a glass table or wearing unfashionable clothing because it was part of the script. It was just a play. So theater, I thought, was going to be my escape from my fat girl fate. So naturally, I went to New York City to study theater because that's what you do. And one August morning in 2006, my father and I packed up his SUV and we drove from Texas up the East Coast to New York City. I thought I had arrived. I thought everything was going to be different, but New York was not exactly what I thought it was going to be, and I think that my whole 4-year undergraduate experience can kind of be summed up in my freshman year review that I got. So in the studio that I was placed in, we take classes in everything our freshman year: directing, design, stage management, acting, movement, voice and speech. I even did some African dance. Not good at it. Anyway, the point of that is essentially so that we can kind of find our strengths, our weaknesses, and decide on a path to pursue. But acting had always been my #1 passion. Acting was the reason I was there. And so as I sat in front of my professors at my year-end review, I hoped that they would tell me that the direction my life was taking was to be an actress. But that was not the feedback I got. Most of the feedback revolved around my size. Even my movement teacher, whose class I had spent the entire year like almost trying to sweat my ass off in, he just looked at me and said one thing. All he said was, "You should really lose some weight." So Again, New York was not what I really expected it to be, and after that, I relegated myself to kind of staying behind the scenes. I very rarely acted for the next 3 years of my time there, and I ended up choosing the directing and playwriting tracks instead of the acting one. And at the end of my 4 years, my father drove back up, we packed up his car, and drove back down to Texas, Austin. And that is where I began my transition. So my entire life growing up as the fat girl, I had tried just about every diet in the book, and about every eating disorder too. I got to a point where I realized the only thing I had left to do was to get a weight loss surgery. And so I spent about 2 years trying to figure out a way to finance this myself, working some crappy entry-level office admin job just out of college, and I was coming up with nothing. Then one day, my mother asked if I wanted the surgery. She had no idea that I had been trying to finance this myself for 2 years. But I think she too was afraid of what my future would hold if I didn't get the surgery. So in November of 2012, I got gastric sleeve surgery, which is where they remove about 2/3 of your stomach. So it goes from being about the size of a giant lima bean to a banana. And because of that surgery, I lost about 250 pounds of fat and skin because I also had to have 2 additional skin removal surgeries as a result of my weight loss. So 3 years later, I became the person you see now. And although I looked different on the outside, I knew on the inside I hadn't actually changed, and yet suddenly everyone was treating me like a different person. My male friends were suddenly being a lot more attentive to me and even flirtatious. My female friends were jealous of me for reasons that they would never have been jealous of me before, and they even told me so. I had one of my best friends at the time say to me, "You know, I'm really glad that you didn't become a bitch because you totally could have." Yeah, that's kind of my reaction too. So I was learning a new lesson in Austin, despite not even being in school, and that lesson was that my visual information had suddenly become my identity. But my visual information was a liar. I mean, looking at me, you would never have known that I was the fat girl that I once weighed over 400 pounds. Would you have? So eventually, I decided that I would start living my double life on the West Coast. And I packed up my own car one August, morning in 2015, and drove from Texas up the West Coast this time to San Francisco. And although I had arrived in the Bay Area without any friends really or any community, 2 weeks later, I was partying in the desert at my first ever Burning Man. Now I had arrived, I thought. As I shimmied on stage in my neon leopard print onesie, I thought, I have it all. I finally have access to the things that normal-sized people get to do in their lives. I danced, I partied, I dated, I could shop in any store and wear what I wanted. I could even flirt with the employees in that store. Again, I had it all. But still, people weren't seeing the real me. All of a sudden, I started to hear this word, pretty. I had never really been called pretty before in my life. And now all of a sudden, people were telling me how pretty I was. And I didn't take it very well. In fact, one day while I was walking down the street in San Francisco a few weeks after this experience at Burning Man, a classmate of mine was mocking me, and he was calling me Barbie, making fun of the way I looked. And because of the identity swamp that my mind was currently swimming in, I just wasn't willing to let it go this time. So I turned around in the middle of the sidewalk and I pointed my finger in his face, which I know is not very polite, but I wanted to make a point. And I said, "Don't fucking call me Barbie again." And he didn't. Not to my face, at least. My identity crisis at that time went into overload. I was here studying for a graduate program, and so I began researching the formation of identity. I was fascinated with understanding the masks that we wear on a daily basis in order to fit in, to feel accepted. And suddenly, one day, my research led me to this discovery. We are what we believe we are. I believed that my life was limited because of my big body. I believed that I couldn't pursue my dreams on the East Coast. I believed that losing all that weight and moving to the West Coast would solve all my problems. I limited myself. I did that. And so now, 2 coasts and 3 college degrees later, I'm finally learning about my own identity in a genuine way. I'm finally learning how to love myself, to love my body, to call my body home. And most importantly, I'm finally learning that I don't have to fit into this world. I only have to fit into the skin that I'm in.